Working full-time in Europe once meant stability. Today it often means just getting by, clean streets, historic buildings, cafes full behind glass windows. But beneath this familiar image there is a cost few openly talk about. People who work every day and still feel like they are falling behind, rent rising faster than wages, smaller grocery baskets, quiet compromises made at home. This video is not about headlines or dramatic claims. It is about everyday life, about what has changed slowly and almost invisibly, about the real cost of living that doesn't appear on postcards, a reality hidden in plain sight across Europe. Europe is often portrayed as a place of balance, culture, and security, a continent where life seems stable and carefully structured, where public spaces are clean, transportation works, and history blends effortlessly with modern life. This image is powerful and deeply rooted, but daily reality tells a much quieter and more complex story. Behind the charming streets and postcard views, many households live in constant calculation mode, measuring every expense, delaying plans, and adjusting expectations. The illusion suggests comfort while the reality demands continuous adaptation. The gap between what Europe represents and what it requires to live here has been widening slowly, almost invisibly. This video is not about extremes or collapse. It is about pressure, about how small increases accumulate until they reshape everyday life. And if you live here or have felt this shift yourself, consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and sharing your experience in the comments, because the real cost of living is not just financial, it is the distance between the life people imagine and the life they are actually managing to sustain. Housing has become the most constant and quietly overwhelming pressure in everyday life across Europe. Rent absorbs a growing share of income before anything else is considered, leaving little room for flexibility, saving, or long-term planning. Buying a home increasingly feels distant even for those with stable employment and years of experience. Utilities that once followed predictable patterns now fluctuate month to month. Electricity, heating, water, and basic services add layers of uncertainty to household budgets. Food prices rise gradually rather than dramatically, but those small increases accumulate over time. Grocery baskets become lighter while receipts grow longer. Eating out shifts from routine to exception. Transportation adds another invisible cost. Fuel prices, public transit passes, maintenance, and daily commuting expenses quietly shape where people can live and how they move. Distance itself becomes part of the cost of living. None of these pressures feel catastrophic on their own, but together they create a constant background strain. Life becomes an exercise in prioritization. People delay purchases, postpone repairs, rethink mobility, and narrow their daily choices. The cost of living is not experienced as a sudden crisis, but as a continuous adjustment process, one that slowly reshapes habits, routines, and expectations. Freedom becomes conditional, tied to numbers rather than needs, and this invisible weight follows people through every ordinary decision they make. Full-time employment across Europe no longer guarantees a sense of stability or progression. Wages continue to exist, but their purchasing power steadily erodes. Effort remains constant while results feel increasingly limited. Even professionals with education and experience find themselves budgeting carefully, recalculating priorities, and redefining what security means. Income often arrives already allocated to essentials, leaving little margin for savings, emergencies, or rest. Overtime and secondary work become common responses not driven by ambition but by necessity. Productivity remains high while financial confidence declines. The traditional promise that consistent work leads to gradual improvement feels weaker. Careers no longer offer clear upward movement but rather maintenance. People stay busy, connected, and responsible, yet feel exposed to small disruptions. A minor expense can destabilize an entire month. Work shifts from a pathway forward to a mechanism of balance. Effort is no longer measured by progress but by endurance. This reshapes how people relate to their jobs, not as sources of identity or growth, but as tools for stability in an increasingly narrow margin environment. The human impact of rising living costs rarely arrives all at once, it unfolds slowly, almost quietly, until new behaviors become normal. Young adults delay independence not out of preference but necessity, shared apartments extend into their 30s, family homes become long-term solutions rather than temporary stops, relationships adjust under financial pressure, couples reconsider timelines, commitments are postponed, decisions once guided by desire are now filtered through affordability. Everyday life becomes emotionally heavier, stress settles in as a background presence rather than a moment of crisis, city centers remain visually active yet feel less inhabited, people pass through rather than stay, small businesses struggle to maintain consistency, familiar shops close without noise, replaced by temporary uses or remain empty, neighborhoods begin to change character as affordability determines who can remain and who must leave, community ties weaken as turnover increases, neighbors become less familiar, social circles shrink, the emotional cost is subtle but persistent, confidence erodes, long-term planning feels uncertain, people continue working, contributing, and functioning, but with less margin for error. Resilience becomes a daily requirement rather than a personal trait. Families learn to manage pressure by simplifying life, reducing expectations, and accepting limits. The cost of living is not only felt in wallets but in moods, relationships, and the way people imagine their future. Stability feels conditional, belonging feels temporary, and the sense of control slowly gives way to careful maintenance. Cities do not announce their transformation, they change quietly through accumulation, small shifts that individually seem insignificant but together redefine urban life. The first signs appear in movement, residents stay for shorter periods, apartments turn over more frequently, long-term neighbors disappear without ceremony, storefronts remain empty longer, replaced by temporary businesses or nothing at all. City centers that once held daily life now feel active only at certain hours, offices close earlier, streets grow quieter sooner, affordability pushes people outward, not suddenly, but steadily, commuting distances increase, time becomes another hidden cost, daily routines stretch as people travel further to access work and housing. Neighborhoods once shaped by continuity become transitional spaces, places to pass through rather than settle into, local identity softens as familiarity fades, independent businesses face rising costs and reduced foot traffic, closures happen individually, rarely noticed, but collectively reshape entire districts, public spaces remain maintained yet feel less social, cultural life becomes scheduled rather than spontaneous, gatherings require planning, chance encounters become rarer, the city continues to function, infrastructure holds, services operate, but something intangible erodes, continuity, memory, the feeling of belonging to a place over time. Urban life shifts from permanence to movement, from attachment to adaptation. People learn to live lightly, not because they want to, but because stability has become harder to hold. This slow transformation does not look like decline, it looks like adjustment, but its effect is profound. The city becomes efficient but less rooted, active but less connected, and this silent reconfiguration is one of the least visible yet most influential consequences of the modern cost of living. What almost nobody talks about is not just how expensive life has become, but how quickly people learn to absorb that pressure and treat it as normal. Increases that were once described as temporary quietly become permanent, sacrifices that were meant to be short-term turn into long-term habits, expectations slowly adjust downward without a clear moment of decision. Many stop framing the situation as a problem and begin framing it as reality. Daily conversations shift from ambition to management, from growth to balance. Budgeting is no longer a phase but a constant skill. People plan further ahead while feeling less secure. Leisure becomes selective and carefully justified. Rest feels conditional rather than natural. The invisible cost extends beyond money into time, energy, and mental space. Simple decisions now require calculation. Spontaneity fades as planning takes over. Opportunities are weighed against risk instead of curiosity. This quiet adaptation hides the scale of the transformation, not because it is small, but because it is gradual. Pressure blends into routine and becomes harder to isolate when everyone is adjusting. The adjustment itself feels unremarkable. This normalization creates a shared silence, not driven by denial, but by familiarity. People continue functioning, working, commuting, contributing, while carrying a sense that life has narrowed slightly, that margins have thinned, that flexibility has decreased. The cost of living is no longer experienced as a sudden shock but as a background condition, always present, shaping choices without drawing attention to itself. And this may be the most overlooked consequence of all, a society that adapts so efficiently that it barely notices how much has changed. The real cost of living in Europe is not only measured in prices, it is measured in choices postponed, plans adjusted, and lives carefully managed. Cities continue to function, work continues, routines hold, but beneath that stability there is a quiet question waiting to be asked. At what point does adaptation become limitation, and how much change can be absorbed before it reshapes what a good life means? This is not a story of collapse, but of transformation, one that happens slowly enough to feel normal, yet deeply enough to matter. And as you move through your own city, notice the signs, the empty spaces, the longer commutes, the smaller margins. This channel exists to make the unseen visible, to observe what is changing without noise or blame. And in the next episode, we will look closer at another city, another place where the surface tells one story and everyday life tells another.